Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Catch, Hook, and Shoot. Today is July 24th. I know I'm putting the show up a couple days late this week. Sorry about that. Having a little bit of technical issues over the weekend, but everything's squared away, so it's all good. Again, thank you to everybody who checks out the show, who downloads the podcast, checks out the YouTube videos. Definitely appreciate it. Like always, please, like, share, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, anybody you know who likes wrestling. Please, share the show with them. Trying to grow it as much as I possibly can. Make sure you're following on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. All of those, you can just search Catch, Hook, Shoot, and you'll be able to find the show. If you ever want to shoot me an email, anything you want to ask, any ideas, something you'd like to see me talk about on the show, email is catchhookshoot@gmail.com. And of course, you can find the podcast on Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, pretty much anywhere you get your podcast, you'll be able to find it. Like I said, just search Catch, Hook, Shoot. So some interesting stuff going on in the wrestling world this week. Of course, anybody who saw Raw last night saw Stephanie McMahon make the big announcement of the all-women's pay-per-view coming up on October the 28th called Evolution. Definitely a huge step for the women's division. From what they were saying, they're going to be defending all three women's titles at the show, Raw, SmackDown, and NXT, as well as having the finals of the Mae Young tournament. Supposedly there's going to be some former quote-unquote divas there, along with the current crop of female superstars. I'm assuming from all three shows, Raw, SmackDown, and NXT, you'll probably see some of the indie performers that are on the Mae Young tournament on the show too. And I'm thinking it should be a very good show. Obviously, Ronda Rousey's going to be there, so I'm definitely looking forward to checking that out. Should be a great show. Most of the female performers in WWE are fantastic in the ring, so it'll definitely be one to watch. And of course, also again from Raw last night, we saw Roman Reigns and Bobby Lashley in another match for the #1 contendership for the Universal Championship. And of course, it was Roman Reigns came out on top, so he'll be challenging Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam. I'm really hoping this is the last match for these two. I mean, if Brock's done in WWE, then just put the title on Roman. There's always possibility of Braun Strowman coming out and getting involved one way or another, since he's got the Money in the Bank briefcase. But then again, he is defending that briefcase at SummerSlam against Kevin Owens, and if Braun should happen to lose, however that may be, count out, DQ, pin, submission, he loses the briefcase. So Kevin Owens may come out with the briefcase by the end of the night and come out and take the title off of Roman if he happens to beat Brock. So who knows? I mean, they're definitely trying to put some interesting spins on it. I personally was really hoping to see Bobby Lashley against Brock Lesnar. This is probably the last opportunity we would have had to see that matchup in the WWE. So apparently it's not meant to be, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Roman's quote-unquote the guy, so he's would not surprise me at all to see him come out with the Universal Championship for at least a few seconds at SummerSlam, and then possibly a cash-in by either Strowman or Owens, just to kind of satisfy the crowd, I guess, because I think management in WWE is painfully aware if Roman wins the Universal title and that's the end of the show, fans are going to go ballistic, and you may end up having a riot on your hands. Which is unfortunate, because I've said many times, I like Roman Reigns. I have nothing against him. I think he definitely makes a good champion. He's a good face for the company. So, it's really kind of sad that just a small cross-section of fans hate on him so much and tend to kind of take over pay-per-views and TV anytime he wrestles. So, again, have to see how that one comes out. But I'm definitely not expecting Brock Lesnar to hold on to the Universal title past SummerSlam at all. Of course, we've got SmackDown coming up tonight. They're going to be announcing AJ Styles' opponent for SummerSlam. I'm thinking it's probably going to be Samoa Joe. I mean, they've been, kind of dropping hints. Joe's been coming out and beating people down the last couple of weeks. And, of course, AJ and Joe have never had a bad match, especially against each other. So it'll be great to see the two of them going at it at SummerSlam. So I'm hoping that's the direction they go. That's what all the signs are pointing to. So we'll find out for sure tonight. And of course, with the SmackDown Tag Team picture, they're doing a 4-team tournament to determine the #1 contender for the Bludgeon Brothers for SummerSlam, and I guess that's going to kick off tonight. Of course, over the weekend, TNA had their latest pay-per-view, Slammiversary. Big news coming out of there. Brian Cage is the new X Division champion, which is, I think, is awesome. Brian Cage is a great talent. It's definitely about time he got a major title. So definitely congratulations to Brian Cage. Also new 6-man tag team champions from Ring of Honor, the Bullet Club, Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks, the new Ring of Honor 6-man tag team champs. Nick Aldis is still the NWA champion. He had a title defense against Flip Gordon, but of course, Flip didn't come away with the title. So according to the All In Twitter page and everything, he is all out. So have to see if he can find another way to get himself on the show. Also, NXT coming up tomorrow night. I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler here, but I think pretty much everybody's seen this already. I mean, WWE actually put it up on their own website themselves. But Tommaso Ciampa defeated Aleister Black for the NXT Championship, and apparently they have set up a triple threat match for NXT TakeOver Brooklyn for the NXT title, and it's going to be Tommaso Ciampa, Johnny Gargano, and Aleister Black. Should be a ridiculous match. I mean, Gargano and Ciampa have put on, 5-star main events the last time that they've fought each other. You throw Aleister Black into the mix, it's just going to make it that much better. It's just 3 phenomenal performers getting ready to go at it in there. So that should be a lot of fun. And as usual, I'm just based on this one match, I'm kind of looking forward to NXT a little bit more than SummerSlam. So we'll have to see how the final cards shake out, though. There's still quite a few weeks to go before either one of those shows, so have to see how everything shapes up. So the topic I'm covering on the show this week is something very near and dear to my own heart, and that's the history of the Four Horsemen. My opinion, the absolute greatest faction in the history of professional wrestling. Anything that's been done by, whether it's Bullet Club, NWO, D-Generation X, Evolution, name a faction, the Horsemen probably did it first. Of course, they started back in 1985. The original Four Horsemen were Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, and Tully Blanchard, with the manager J.J. Dillon. Flair and the Andersons kind of came together. They're storyline cousins, all of them. Of course, the Andersons, known as the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, going way back in the history of wrestling, back to Lars Anderson and Gene Anderson, and of course Ole and Arn was the fourth Anderson cousin or brother to be brought in, and when they all 4 of them kind of made their way to Crockett Promotions, and it was originally kind of a loose association. They just kind of helped each other out, had each other's backs. Dillon was managing Tully Blanchard and just kind of ended up managing all 4 of them. Of course, the name Four Horsemen was coined by Arn Anderson during an interview when he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, no other group or this much chaos has never been caused by this small group since the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And apparently, according to Arn, Tony Schiavone was the one, after the cameras were off, went up to him and said, "You just named yourselves, you're the Four Horsemen." And then the name just kind of stuck, and the legend just kind of grew from there. Of course, back then they were feuding with all the top baby faces in the NWA territories at the time: Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, Barry Windham, Rock and Roll Express, Road Warriors. And this was at the time you'd see them jumping people in parking lots. I mean, you can actually find the video on YouTube of when they jumped Dusty Rhodes in the parking lot of the Crockett Promotions offices, tied his hands up to a pickup truck in the parking lot, and just took a baseball bat and smashed his hand. Of course, this was, it was all kayfabe, but, this was the kind of thing that you didn't really see other than from the Horsemen, the gang mentality and just the brutal beatdowns and hurting people, just viciously putting people out for, weeks or months at a time, breaking arms, breaking legs, things like that. And it was just, at the time, it was, it was new, it was innovative, and as a kid, I hated the Four Horsemen, and that was kind of the point. They were the top heels in the NWA, and, so you were supposed to hate them. Then, of course, Fast forward a little bit to 1987, Lex Luger made his way to Crockett Promotions and kind of started making overtures to the Horsemen, said he wanted to be a Horseman and things like that, and they brought him on as an associate, not a full-fledged Horseman at that time. And around the same time, Ole Anderson kind of started getting pushed to the back. They were kind of leaving him out of stuff in interviews and things like that, and you know, it was because he was kind of made the scapegoat for he and Arn losing the tag team titles at Starrcade '86. So that's kind of when he started getting pushed to the side. And then apparently he missed a date because he went to see his son wrestle in a tournament. And you know, of course, it was on TV. They were you know, talking in the locker room, and Tully Blanchard said something about, you know, he had to go see his snot-nosed kid, something like that. And next thing you know, the Flair, Arn, Tully, and Luger all beating down Ole, and basically, you know, kicked him out of the group. And Luger was then made a full-fledged member at that point. And then that's when that version of the Horsemen is when you saw the invention of the War Games come to be. Of course, brainchild of Dusty Rhodes, one of my favorite all-time matches. On a side note, so glad that NXT brought it back, at least in some shape or form. I know it's a little bit different. They used the 3 teams of 3 men, like they did in the very last War Games in WCW, and there's no top on the cage. But, you know, at least it's something. Hopefully, you know, maybe it'll evolve a little bit. I'm sure they got a lot of feedback. I'm sure they got a lot of negative feedback about not having the top on the cage, and it not being submission or surrender, and having the referee inside the ring and stuff like that. So who knows? We'll have to see what kind of tweaks they make to it this year, because they have already announced there will be another NXT War Games takeover. So we'll see if it works the same way. So yeah, and typically in the War Games back in '87, like I was saying, the first set of War Games matches that they had was against Dusty Rhodes, Nikita Koloff, the Road Warriors, and Paul Ellering. It was 5 against 5. And of course, on the Horseman side, you had the 4 Horsemen: Flair, Arn, Tully, and Luger, and J.J. Dillon. The very first War Games match, J.J. Dillon actually ended up with a separated shoulder because the Road Warriors tried to do their Doomsday Device finisher, but of course with the top on the cage, they weren't able to hoist him up quite as high. Animal wasn't able to fully get him on his shoulders. He had him up in more of almost like a back suplex position. When Hawk came off and hit him, he didn't get the full rotation and came down straight on his shoulder, separated the shoulder, and he was actually out for the remainder of the War Games that particular year, and was replaced by a masked wrestler called the War Machine, who's actually Ray Traylor, better known as the Big Boss Man. So yeah, again, just a lot of innovative stuff going on in the early days of the Horsemen. So move on a little bit further. Lex Luger's the United States champion. He's fighting Dusty Rhodes at Starrcade '87, which was here in Chicago, in a steel cage match. In the course of that match, J.J. Dillon tried to help Luger out through a steel chair over the top of the cage. As Luger was leaning down to pick it up, of course, Dusty grabbed him, DDT'd him on onto the chair, and won the United States title at that point. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for Luger. It was shortly after that, you know, he started blaming JJ for losing the title. And once they got to the Bunkhouse Stampedes that year, for those who don't know what a Bunkhouse Stampede is, it's basically a battle royal, like a street fight battle royal. Guys came, you know, basically dressed in street clothes. You're allowed to bring whatever kind of weapons you want. They did multiple of these at shows throughout, you know, the territory, and basically the big culmination was the final Bunkhouse Stampede. Like, whoever won the most battle royals got a big trophy at the end of it, and it was usually always Dusty Rhodes that won. But yeah, so during one of the Bunkhouse Stampedes, the last 4 men in the ring were Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, J.J. Dillon, and Lex Luger. And Arn and Tully kind of made an agreement, say, you know, hey, JJ's never won one of these. We're going to eliminate ourselves and let JJ have this. Well, Luger didn't quite like that idea, so he tossed JJ out of the ring, and Luger took the victory, and that was kind of also his exit from the Horsemen at that point. So, and that's where he, after that, hooked up with Barry Windham, and you know, kind of went on to feud with the Horsemen over the tag team titles. And of course, at I believe it was the first think it was the first Clash of the Champions. Luger and Wyndham actually beat Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard for the World Tag Team titles. In the rematch, though, or one of the rematches, Wyndham actually turned on Luger and joined the Horsemen himself. So, of course, that gives us the Horseman grouping that went into the WWE Hall of Fame: Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and Barry Windham. This, by all accounts, was the best grouping in the history of the Horsemen, because they actually held every major title in the NWA all at the same time. Of course, Flair was the world champion, Wyndham the United States champion, and Arn and Tully the tag team champions. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to argue when somebody says that was the best group of all time. Just take a look at the stats. So, fast forward to September 1988, Horsemen kind of started to fall apart at that point. That's when Arn and Tully left Crockett Promotions. I believe it was some kind of contract dispute. I'm sure money was involved, typically is in those kind of things. And they went to WWF, were managed by Bobby Heenan, were known as the Brainbusters. So Flair, Wyndham, and Dillon were still in the NWA and Crockett Promotions. This wasn't WCW quite yet. And they continued to call themselves the Horsemen. They kind of hinted at adding some new members, like J.J. Dillon actually managed Butch Reed for a little while. Kendall Windham turned on his tag team partner during a TV taping and held up the four fingers, kind of indicating that he was going to be part of the group, which, it definitely would have been different. I don't think it would have been as strong of a group with Butch Reed and Kendall Windham, but they were kind of trying to keep it going. But it just never really caught on. Neither one of them was ever made an official member of the Horsemen. And then, of course, in 1989, J.J. Dillon left Crockett Promotions and took a front office job in the WWF. At that point, Flair and Wyndham stopped using the Horseman name, and Hiro Matsuda actually took over as their manager, and they started referring to themselves as the Yamasaki Corporation. And of course, other people involved at the time were Michael Hayes was part of it. There were a few other guys that were involved in the Yamasaki Corporation, and of course they had feuds with the big baby faces of the time: Lex Luger, Sting, Ricky Steamboat, Eddie Gilbert. Shortly thereafter, though, Barry Windham did lose the U.S. title and left for WWF himself. Says at the time he was called the Widowmaker. Not really a gimmick, he just, kind of his normal persona. Is just, they kind of just put that tag on him, called him the Widowmaker. Kendall Windham kind of was dropped to a what you would call an enhancement talent. Michael Hayes started the Freebirds back up, so that kind of and Hiro Matsuda left WCW, so that was kind of the end of the Yamasaki Corporation, and Ric Flair at that point was kind of a loner. Interesting note at this time, of course, you had Arn and Tully as the Brainbusters were already in WWF. Barry Windham made the jump and became the Widowmaker. J.J. Dillon was working in the WWF front office. And around this time, there was a lot of speculation that Ric Flair wasn't happy with WCW anymore. He was looking to possibly make a jump. There was a lot of rumors swirling that he was going to show up in WWF and reform the Horsemen there. I mean, 4 out of 5 of them were already there. So if Flair would have made that jump, I mean, Vince would have been crazy not to reform the Horsemen as a group in WWF at that time. But of course, Flair stayed in WCW for a couple more years after that, so we never really got to see that formation of the Horsemen in the WWF, which is kind of a shame. I think I would have loved to see them on that big of a stage. I think wrestling fans everywhere, knew who the Horsemen were, even if you were primarily a WWF fan. Everybody knew who the Four Horsemen were. Everybody knew who Ric Flair was. It just would have been really cool to see them, at a WrestleMania or something like that, or to just, come out and jump on Hogan after a title defense or something. There was just so much that could have been done because, it's the Horsemen. You can't go wrong, especially with that particular grouping. But again, it didn't happen, sadly enough. So all we can do right now is kind of dream and think of what could have been. But of course, moving on to late 1989, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard both leave the WWF. Arn goes back to WCW, hooks back up with Flair. Tully was actually in the process of trying to get a new contract with WCW, but apparently he had failed a drug test before leaving WWF. WCW got wind of it and pulled their offer. So Tully wasn't able to return, but Arn did. He hooked back up with Flair, Ole, and surprisingly enough, Sting to create a new version of the Horsemen. And this time the Horsemen were they were baby faces, and they were feuding with Gary Hart and his J-Tex Corporation, which was Terry Funk, the Great Muta, Buzz Sawyer, and a masked wrestler called the Dragon Master. Then it was during this time that they actually made a turn back to being heels, which I thought the Horsemen should always be heels. They were just the absolute best heels in the business at the time. But yeah, they went back to being heels, turned on Sting because Sting, would dare to challenge Ric Flair for the World Heavyweight Championship, and that was a big no-no. You didn't, no Horseman ever challenged Ric Flair. That's just kind of the way it was. So of course, that kind of reaffirmed the Horsemen of old, and went on to feud with Sting, Luger, the Steiner brothers, El Gigante. Again, the top baby faces in the company, or what were being pushed as the top baby faces in the company. Shortly thereafter was when Ole Anderson retired, and Barry Windham actually came back to WCW as well. Was added back to the Horsemen, and the fourth Horseman at that time they added was Sid Vicious, which again, he doesn't really fit the mold of a Horseman, but obviously he's big, strong at that time, new young guy, so kind of along the same lines as when they added Luger. He was like kind of the hot new thing in the company, so he was added and made a Horseman. This group actually lasted until 1991. At that point, Sid and Ric Flair both left for the WWF, of course. We all know how that went. Flair won the world title at the Royal Rumble. Sid went on to feud with Hogan, and Flair with Macho Man. Both of them did quite a bit of good stuff in WWF in those days. So after that, after Flair left actually as the World Heavyweight Champion, there was a cage match that year with Barry Windham and Lex Luger. Of course, going into it, Windham, being a Horseman, was the heel. Lex Luger was the babyface. During their match to determine a new World Heavyweight Champion, they actually pulled a double switch. Harley Race, acting as Luger's manager, slipped him, if I remember right, it was a roll of quarters or something like that, and he used that to knock out Windham and took the World Heavyweight title, making him a heel, and Windham kind of the de facto babyface. And as far as Arn Anderson, he ended up forming a new tag team with Larry Zbyszko, calling themselves the Enforcers, and they actually joined the Dangerous Alliance, which was, of course, Paulie Dangerously, Paul Heyman, at the helm of that one, Rick Rude, Bobby Eaton, and Steve Austin, surprisingly enough. Now just think about the names in that group right there. Arn Anderson, Larry Zbyszko, Rick Rude, Bobby Eaton, Steve Austin, and Paulie Dangerously. They kind of took the spot of the Horsemen, because there was no Horseman at the time, so they took that spot of the top heel faction in the business, not just in WCW at that time, but they, I kind of think they were, people always wanted to compare them to the Horsemen. They never kind of got out of the Horseman's shadow. I think that's why a lot of people, you don't hear too many people talking about the Dangerous Alliance right now, because it was, WCW and the NWA was always, that was Horseman territory. Had the Dangerous Alliance come along, 10 years sooner, I think we'd be, talking more about the Dangerous Alliance than the Horsemen, or at least on the same level. But that grouping of talent was just ridiculous, especially when you think about the stuff that Steve Austin went on to do. He became the top superstar in the business just a few years after this. So Dangerous Alliance definitely was a top tier group. It was just, like I said, I don't think they were ever able to shake the Horseman's shadow in the WCW. Then, of course, fast forward to 1993, Ric Flair comes back from WWF. reforms the Horsemen, this time with Arn Anderson and Paul Roma, another one that's kind of out of left field. Roma was, I mean, he was good. He's a talented guy. WWE, he was, I'd say, a mid-carder. He wasn't really an enhancement talent or anything like that. He, of course, had a pretty successful tag team with Jim Powers called the Young Stallions. And, I mean, I like Paul Roma. I just never pictured him as a Horseman. This is actually considered the weakest incarnation of the Horsemen. They, at that time, were feuding with Barry Windham and the Hollywood Blondes, which was Steve Austin and Brian Pillman. So, of course, Steve Austin's name is in the mix again. And this group actually only lasted 6 months. There was apparently an incident during a European tour between Sid Vicious and Arn Anderson involving a stabbing of some sort. So, and Paul Roma, separated from the group, formed a tag team with Paul Orndorff called Pretty Wonderful, which was a good tag team. They were tag team champs for a little while. So, Roma definitely had a much better career in WCW than he did in WWF. And I really think Paul Roma gets kind of a bad rap because, like I said, I never pictured him as a Horseman. I don't hold that against them. I mean, the Horsemen picked their own members at that time. So, Flair and Arn obviously saw something in him. And who would turn down the opportunity to be a Horseman? And answer me that. I don't think anybody would. But yeah, so at that point, the Horsemen kind of split. Like I said, Roma went with Paul Orndorff. And Flair went on to feud with Vader over the World Heavyweight title, again, kind of making him a face. Fast forward to 1995, Flair and Arn teamed up with Vader, at that time known as Big Man Vader, against Hulk Hogan, who had just recently come to WCW. And after Vader lost to Hulk Hogan, Flair and Arn kind of turned on him and beat him down a little bit, and then they had some matches against the two of them against Vader, handicap matches. When Vader actually defeated Flair and Anderson, they kind of turned on each other, started a little bit of infighting, which at the time was a radical move because you never saw the two of them on opposite sides. You never saw them take a swing at each other or anything like that. So it was that was huge news in the wrestling world at the time that Flair and Anderson were against each other. And of course, Arn Anderson hooked up with Brian Pillman at this time, who Pillman, of course, helped Anderson in beating Flair in some matches and stuff. And then this is when Ric Flair went to Sting, actually, and literally begged him to be his tag team partner to take on Anderson and Pillman, to which Sting reluctantly agreed, to his own detriment, unfortunately, because when the match finally took place, Flair supposedly was injured earlier in the night, so Sting went out alone against Anderson and Pillman, put up a good fight. Then Flair finally made his way out to the ring, gets the hot tag, the crowd goes crazy. Flair gets in the ring and immediately jumps on Sting and just starts beating him down. And, it turns out the whole thing was a plot to get the Horsemen back together and just, jump on the top guy in the company, which was Sting. And this was the point where they added, as the fourth Horseman, they added Chris Benoit. I won't say a whole lot about him, but so that to me was the last really strong grouping of the Horsemen, was Flair, Anderson, Benoit, and Pillman. I just think it was a really, really good group. Had great chemistry, but they still weren't a super cohesive unit. Most of the time you saw Benoit kind of on his own, this is where they were feuding with Hogan and Sting and Savage and Lex Luger. Then, of course, 1996, Brian Pillman leaves WCW, goes to ECW, then eventually to the WWF. In June of 96 is when Steve McMichael was added to the group during a tag team match between Flair and Anderson versus McMichael and Kevin Green. Of course, McMichael turned on Kevin Green midway through the match and allowed Flair and Anderson to win, and thus became the fourth member of the Horsemen. And at that point, it was shortly thereafter that the NWO was formed, and of course that kind of automatically made every WCW wrestler a babyface. So the Horsemen kind of took up the fight against the NWO fast forward to 1997, Jeff Jarrett makes his debut in WCW, and is making overtures to become part of the Horsemen. Ric Flair gives him his endorsement, I guess you could say. He kind of becomes the fifth Horseman, and doesn't last very long. There was a lot of infighting, of course, because between Deborah McMichael, Steve McMichael's wife, and Woman, who was Chris Benoit's valet and Ric Flair's valet, a lot of fighting between them, and then Deborah paying a lot of attention and protecting Jeff Jarrett, and basically Flair said Jarrett was causing too much trouble and kicked him out of the group. Then later in '97 is when Arn Anderson had to retire, and basically gave his spot as the enforcer to Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect from WWE, which I loved at the time. I always thought Curt Hennig would have made a great Horseman, so I was really excited about this. And then come War Games '97, it was the Horsemen against the NWO. It all turned out to be a plot on the NWO's part. Hennig, when he came into the ring, turned on the Horsemen, helped the NWO. And this was, of course, the famous spot where Hennig slammed Ric Flair's head in the door of the cage during the War Games match, and basically affirmed himself as a full-fledged member of the NWO. And then that September, Flair actually disbands the Four Horsemen. There was a rumor at this time, because Bret Hart was known to be coming into WCW, his time in WWF was just about up. There were rumors going around of Bret Hart being added to the Horsemen, taking Steve McMichael's place. Again, another person who I thought would have made a fantastic Horseman was Bret Hart. But of course that didn't happen. When Hart showed up, he aligned himself with the NWO for the most part. Never really a full-fledged member of the NWO, but he was definitely a heel, so he was on that side. But had that panned out, in my opinion, that would have been probably the best grouping of the Horsemen that you could have gotten, because it would have been Ric Flair, Chris Benoit, Bret Hart, and Curt Hennig. But of course, like I said, the plans with Hennig changed. He joined the NWO, and Hart didn't come in until a little bit later, and ended up aligning with the NWO himself. Shortly thereafter, Ric Flair actually left WCW for a period of time. He apparently missed a date to go, ironically enough, the same thing as the storyline issue with Ole Anderson years earlier. Ric Flair no-showed an event because he went to see his son wrestle in a tournament, and this was a legitimate thing that was going on. And Eric Bischoff actually sued Ric Flair for breach of contract, and it was apparently just a big legal mess. So Flair was gone for quite a few months. During that time, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Steve McMichael were all pretty much begging Arn Anderson, get the Horsemen back together. The NWO and Eric Bischoff are just running roughshod over WCW and things like that. So a few months later, Flair actually, apparently the issues worked out. Flair came back. They did reform the Horsemen with Flair, Benoit, McMichael, and Dean Malenko as the newest member. I really like this group. McMichael I never saw as a Horseman. I just didn't think he quite fit the mold, but I like Steve McMichael. I'm from Chicago. I love the Bears. I love Steve McMichael. So I was willing to deal with it. But yeah, I definitely liked the addition of Benoit and Malenko. I love the two of them as a tag team. I think they worked phenomenally together. And I thought it was a good group. Of course, they feuded with the NWO and Bischoff. Ric Flair won a match against Bischoff, which made him the president of WCW for 90 days. And of course, going into 1999, Steve McMichael actually left wrestling, left WCW, and while Flair was president, he actually gave the United States title to his son David, and basically used Benoit and Malenko to help him keep the title during his matches and stuff. Which, of course, they got tired of it, and basically, said we're done. And that was pretty much the end of the official Four Horsemen. Not the best of endings. They just kind of faded away. The last two just kind of walked away, Benoit and Malenko, and that was pretty much that. After WWE purchased WCW, there was never really an attempt to reform the Horsemen. Of course, there were groups that obviously were inspired by the Horsemen. One of them in 2000 was called Team Package, which was Flair and Luger. That was kind of short-lived. Flair in 2001 formed a group called Magnificent Seven, which was, of course, Ric Flair, the Steiner Brothers, Jeff Jarrett, Lex Luger, Buff Bagwell, and Road Warrior Animal. And then, of course, in WWE in 2003, probably the closest that we've ever had to seeing an official Four Horsemen in WWE was Evolution, which, of course, was Triple H, Randy Orton, Batista, and Ric Flair. Arguably one of the more popular and powerful factions in WWE history. Definitely one of my favorites. Then, of course, when Ric Flair moved on to TNA in 2010, he formed a group called Fortune. And this was Ric Flair, AJ Styles, Desmond Wolfe, who was Nigel McGuinness, Beer Money, Bobby Roode and James Storm, Frankie Kazarian, Doug Williams, Matt Morgan, Rob Terry, and Christopher Daniels. So there was more than 4 guys, but it was, obviously based on the Horsemen because it was Fortune when they originally started, F-O-U-R. Then they just changed it to the standard spelling of the word fortune. This was another group that I thought was great. They had the big, strong guys with Matt Morgan and Rob Terry. You had the mat technicians with Nigel McGuinness and Doug Williams. You had a fantastic tag team in Beer Money. Then you had the high-flying X Division guys in AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Frankie Kazarian. And then, of course, Ric Flair in the lead. I mean, on paper, this is a group that could have just run roughshod over TNA, which they did for a little while, but it still wasn't quite the same. Then, of course, here recently we've got a couple of different groups who call themselves the Four Horsewomen. You've got the Four Horsewomen of NXT, which is Charlotte Flair, Ric's daughter, Bayley, Becky Lynch, and Sasha Banks. And they're kind of the ones who they didn't start the women's revolution, so to speak, but they, I think, pretty much personified it because they were some of the first ones to really go out there and prove, like, hey, we can go just as hard and just as good as any guy on this roster. And they went out there and they proved it, and they were the first ones to get pay-per-view main events as far as like NXT takeovers and things like that. Bayley and Sasha Banks have had some of the greatest matches that I personally have ever seen. And I'm not just talking women's matches, I'm talking matches in general. So, and obviously Charlotte Flair is part of the group. Ric Flair's daughter, she is right now the best female wrestler in the world as far as I'm concerned. I defy anybody to show me somebody better. And then we've got the Four Horsewomen of MMA, who are actually now all under contract to WWE, which are Ronda Rousey, Shayna Baszler, Jasmine Duke, and Marina Shafir. Of course, Ronda Rousey is on Raw. Shayna Baszler is the NXT Women's Champion, and Duke and Shafir are right now at the Performance Center, which I'm sure they'll be getting called up to NXT sometime soon. I mean, I can't, they're both professional MMA fighters. I can't see them needing too much training, probably more polishing than anything else. And I know everybody's been kind of waiting with bated breath to find out when are we going to have that 4-on-4 horsewomen versus horsewomen match with the all women's pay-per-view coming up. Who knows? We may see it sooner than we think. We may see it at Survivor Series. We may see it at WrestleMania. But I definitely think we're going to see it at some point, especially with as much attention as being given to women's wrestling right now. They would be crazy not to do it. And I think if Triple H has anything to say about it, it will definitely happen. So that's it as far as the official Horseman history and official groups throughout the last decade or two since the the original Horseman split, and so now I'm going to get into just kind of having a little fun here, just doing some fantasy booking of my own, because there are some guys on the roster right now and in the last 10 years or so that I think could make a great Horseman type faction. One of them that I've been, that's really kind of caught my eye right now, and I think would be just an amazing grouping of guys. And if you were to bring in Ric Flair, say, as the manager in that J.J. Dillon type role, I think the fans would eat it up, because these are guys that the fans are solidly behind, and I think it would fly. I think it would be great. I don't expect to see it happen. I mean, this is just, like I said, my own kind of fantasy booking. But one grouping that I think would work really well together would be Dolph Ziggler in the lead role, kind of the Ric Flair role, just because he is the veteran. I mean, he's been around WWE for so long. He's so good in the ring, so good on the mic. He's got all the tools to take that spot and be that lead horse, so to speak. Another one I'd like to personally would put in this group is Bobby Roode. Of course, he was part of Team Canada in TNA at the beginning of his career. He was called the Canadian Enforcer. So there is kind of that link there, the little homage that he gave to Arn Anderson at the beginning of his career with that nickname. And I wish Bobby Roode would turn heel. I really do, because I know I'm not the only one. I don't like Bobby Roode as a babyface. It just doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem natural for him. I just think he's a natural heel. He's just great at it. He's good on the mic, again, great in the ring. And I think him and Ziggler would work really well together. I mean, they worked well together as opponents. I think they work even better together as both of them heels and as a team. And then the last two members of this particular grouping for me would be Sheamus and Cesaro, the Bar. I mean, there's no way that those four guys could not believably do the same thing that the Horsemen did back in '88, as far as holding every title on whatever brand they're on, with either Ziggler or Roode as world champion, Ziggler or Roode as the secondary champion, whether it be Intercontinental or US, and the Bar as tag team champions, which they've been already several times. So, and I could just, they all have that arrogance, that cockiness, those heel tendencies, but then they also know how to, they know how to work the fans so well. So, then another group that I think would work really well, it'd be a little more, little less experienced, but I think all these guys, the guy in the leadership role in this particular group is definitely a veteran, but the other three, a little bit less experienced on the main stage of WWE, but I think they would all mesh really well together, and along the same lines as the first group that I mentioned. They're all just great heels, and know how to work the crowd and know how to use those underhanded tactics, and just to make people laugh with them and love them for 1 second, and then just boo them out of the building the next after doing something slimy. And so the next group would be in the leadership role would be The Miz. I mean, he's already been a world champion, Intercontinental champion multiple times, US champion, tag champion. He's done pretty much everything there is to do in WWE. He's definitely qualified for it. Probably the best heel in WWE right now. I don't see any better heels in the company. Maybe Brock Lesnar, but I wouldn't even call him a heel. People just don't like him at this point because he's never there. But that's a whole other subject. So yeah, put The Miz in that Ric Flair leadership type role. The next guy who I would call the enforcer of this group is Baron Corbin. There was a while there I was not real sure about Baron Corbin. I mean, I like his in-ring style, but he wasn't seeming to get the mic skills really well. But here lately, whatever he's been doing is working, especially since he took on this constable role, started shaving his head, changed his look, and he's, it fits him, and he can still get in the ring and, do his thing, which he's great. Like I said, I love his in-ring style. I love his finishing move. So I think Corbin would definitely fit that mold of being the enforcer of this particular group. And then the last two guys, to me, this is a no-brainer. I mean, they model themselves after two of the original Horsemen, the Revival. Dawson and Wilder. I mean, these guys are a throwback to teams like Tully and Arn. And I think they're, well overdue for a break. They've been on the main roster for a little bit now. I understand, there were some injury issues when they first got called up, but here lately, they've been they've been getting some shots against Roman, and had a few matches against Roman and Lashley, and the fans love them. I would love to see them in the title picture. I'd love to see them get a title match like tomorrow. I would love to see them as the champions and see where they go with it. So yeah, those are two groups that I think, with today's roster, could believably form a Four Horsemen faction. Like I said, if they could possibly bring in Ric Flair in a managerial type role, as the in that J.J. Dillon spot, just to add more credibility to it. I just think obviously it's kind of pulling from the past, but you tweak it to fit the time. I mean, not everything that the Horsemen did back in 1987 is going to fly in 2018, but I definitely think there's a lot there to work with. It's just something I would love to see. Again, the Horsemen to me are the greatest faction in the history of the business, bar none. And another kind of like fantasy booking that I had, and obviously this is not superstars that are with the company right now. Well, a couple of them are, but I always thought it would be kind of cool to see a UK Four Horsemen, so to speak. And the guys that I thought would make such a great team would have been Wade Barrett, Sheamus, Drew McIntyre, and Mason Ryan, with either William Regal or Fit Finlay as the manager. I just don't know why. I just always thought the four of those guys would have worked really well together. They're all from the UK. Obviously, Wade Barrett is English, Sheamus is Irish, Drew McIntyre Scottish, and Mason Ryan is Welsh. I just thought that was kind of cool too, representing the four countries of the UK. So, but again, half of those guys aren't in WWE anymore, so it's obviously not going to happen. I just thought it would have been, obviously Mason Ryan would have been the enforcer, the big heavy hitting kind of guy. Of course, Mason Ryan didn't ever really have the mic skills of an Arn Anderson, but I think he would have fit nicely with the rest of them, because of course Barrett was a good talker, Sheamus is a good talker, Drew McIntyre has become a great talker. So I just think, and pairing them with either Finlay or more likely William Regal, who is also a great talker, would have kind of made up for whatever skills might have been lacking in any of these guys at that time. Because of course, when all four of these guys were in the WWE at the same time, they were all very, very young. Most of them were rookies around the same time. But I think that could have probably worked to their advantage too. And of course, one last grouping here, what I thought for me would have been the ultimate Four Horsemen. Of course, Ric Flair's not included in this group, but all four of these guys definitely could have been Horsemen in their time, and that was Bret Hart, Kurt Hennig, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko. To me, these are the top four technical wrestlers in the history of the business, and to have all four of them in one group would have been, I just think it would have been a sight to see. It would have been great, because for me, I've always loved the technical wrestling side of it. I mean, I have nothing against the high flyers and things like that. I love AJ Styles and everything like that, but technical wrestling's always been my favorite. Bret Hart, one of my all-time favorites. Hennig, Benoit, and Malenko, like I said, I just think that would have been a ridiculous grouping of four guys as a team. But again, not meant to be. Just kind of some fantasy booking here. So that's pretty much all I've got for this week. Hope you guys enjoyed the little walk down memory lane with the Four Horsemen. What do you guys think? Who would have made a good Horseman? Who would make a good Horseman faction today? You know, do you like my ideas? Do you hate them? Would you switch it up a little bit? Maybe instead of Ziggler Root in the bar, you'd rather see Ziggler Root in the revival. You know, but let me know what you think. Leave me any kind of comments, questions, anything like that. Feel free. Again, make sure you're following the show on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram. Search Catch Hook Shoot. You'll be able to find it. You can find the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Podbean, YouTube. Anywhere you get a podcast, you should be able to find us. Like I said, search Catch Hook Shoot. And if you ever want to drop me an email, it's catchhookshoot@gmail.com. So I will sign off for this week. Thank you to everybody for checking out the show, and I will see you guys soon.